America's the greatest country in the world. Here we are. This is it. This is the day. We're a couple hours away from the first polls closing. We're going to be here throughout the night. Grateful you're here, however you're watching us, thefirsttv.com for all of those different ways. Let's get right to our analysis with the great Dana Loesch, host of The Dana Show. Dana, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. It's our Super Bowl.
This is it. Nothing else matters. I'm working till 2 a.m. I don't know how I'm going to go to bed even at 2 a.m. I mean, this is it. And everyone's like, oh, are you going to be okay tonight? It's like, yeah, it's like the greatest day ever. And I think it's going to be a good night tonight. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I am a super superstitious person. I live in Texas, but my hometown baseball team, St. Louis Cardinals, and I will not watch a game until the second inning, just out of superstition. So yes. This is even more so. There's even more at stake here. So I feel like I can't say that I feel great or confident because it is really close. And it all comes down to voter turnout, as you know, from what we've seen in 2020, what we saw 22, 20, 18, and 2016, the biggest threat to Republicans at the polls isn't actually Democrats. And it's not even, and this is going to upset some people, it's not even really fraud. It is Republican turnout. Whenever Republicans don't turn out, Democrats win. But you have to look at how many more registered Republicans there are in so many of these battleground areas. So when there's a deluge of Republican voters, when you swamp the polls, so to speak, which is a phrase that I really wish we would have come up with 10 years earlier, when you swamp the polls, you're not only getting around any kind of margin of error, you're getting around any kind of margin of fraud, any kind of margin of hate, whatever Democrats want to throw at it, you're overcoming it. And so I'm optimistic, to answer your question, that is what is happening due to all of the reports that I'm seeing and just from what I saw in my own community early voting last week.
And it seems like a flip side, and the Democrat side, maybe not that turnout that they would need to win as well. Actually, let's talk about Texas. I was just looking at one of the reports, not Cook Report, but one of those. And they have the Senate seat in Texas as a toss-up, or not toss-up, like lean Republican. It's like, oh man, what are we even talking about? How can that even be a thing?
It's so this has been several years in the making. Now, I don't know why, and I agree with you. I saw this and I was writing a piece for my Substack to go along with the broadcast today. And I thought, this is weird. Why is it a toss-up? Because he's over 4 points ahead of Ted Cruz is leading Colin Allred, has been consistently, the entire time. But this is relatively close. Now, I will say and this was the last election where he was running against Beto O'Rourke, the furry, lackadaisical slacker Gen Xer who never worked in the private sector a day in his life. Mike, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He actually, Beto was competitive, not Beto, but the machine was competitive. So in Texas, they've been trying to flip Texas like they did in Colorado. Colorado, you had 63 years of Republican administration. In 2 election cycles, they flipped. They were such braggarts about it. They actually wrote a book called The Blueprint. It's for sale on Amazon. They tried to do it in Texas, but Texans are a little more ornery. And so they've sort of failed. Instead, they've been targeting, instead of the entire state, they've been targeting a couple of super red counties, including Tarrant County, the one I live in. Now, this is where Ted Cruz actually lost to Beto O'Rourke the last time he was up for re-election. So Democrats have been laying this groundwork. They started with Winnie Davis. They've been running these weird candidates that wouldn't gain traction in any normal sentient election where people have brain cells. Democrats get out there and they register to vote, and that's what it's all about, registering Democrats to vote so that they can, through incrementation, get to a point where they can actually take a seat and beat a Republican. Now, they're not going to do it this election cycle, but they are getting closer. They got closer with Beto O'Rourke. This is just the machine, and the candidate is the variable in this case. That is considered a toss-up.
Yeah, it's wild.
I don't think it's a toss-up. Yeah, they're too. Cruz has been consistently leading. Allred's not going to win.
Okay. Well, enthusiasm seems to be the theme of this conversation, and that's good. And I'd like to think that any previous Texas election was close only because conservative Texans just take it for granted. And I'm like, well, of course we're a red state.
That's exactly it.
But hopefully
that
won't be it in this election, as you said. Talk to me about gun owners. You know the number, but it's some outrageous number of gun owners who weren't even registered to vote in previous elections.
It's an insane
What do you think
percentage.
Conservatives have done on that front?
It's a weird demo. So gun owners are a weird demo because they're not all just Republicans. There are some well, I don't even know if you could say they're still Democrats anymore, because the Democrat Party just uprooted and left these people. You could say like 15 to 20 years ago, they were Democrats, right? Democrat gun owners. And, they didn't believe in, the ban on, sporting rifles, et cetera. And then you have the kind of moderates and independents and the libertarians. So it's a very interesting group of people who share, the support of the Second Amendment, support of hunting, things like that. They're not as politically nerdy as everyone else is, which is what fascinates me, because, I'm a gun owner and I, hunt occasionally. And I mean, this is also my job. I follow it day in and day out. These people have lives, like they go into the woods to get away from all this stuff. They're not going to follow like every single thing the way we do. So I feel like they're not as obsessive over every single piece of legislation that's coming forward, unless it's like firearm related, hunting related. That being said, it did surprise me to see that a significant percentage of hunters were not registered to vote. And I hope that is being remedied this election cycle. I think for far too long, the Republican Party sort of took that demographic for granted. People assumed, oh, you hunt, you must be a Republican, or, oh, you're a gun owner, you must be a Republican. And more than that, you must be a registered voter. And you're probably, somebody who reliably goes out. You're a high propensity voter. We don't have to worry about you. Not the case. And I think that Republicans are waking up to that and remedying that this election cycle.
Yeah, I can't take anyone for granted. I hope word got to gun owners, all the clips of Kamala saying, I want to take your guns away. And one of my favorite was when she's like, whoa, mandatory gun buyback. Yes, but we got to make sure we adequately compensate people for taking their guns. It's like, that's not the problem, Kamala. It's not how much you're going to give me from the gun you're taking. It's the taking of it. So hopefully word got to them. I want to talk about women. This seems to be, if I wanted to ask you to steel man the Kamala case, it seems to be that, at least they're saying that the women vote is more on their side. Do you find that to be true? What do you think of that?
I've seen it. So in some of the battleground states, I was looking at early voting, and at least in Pennsylvania, which is where the state everybody's talking about of the battleground states, it seems to be that female voters, early voting, they're Democrats. They're breaking for Democrats. Whether that holds up in every battleground state, I don't know. Historically, that's kind of where women have always fallen. And I'd like to think that we have evolved as, a human subspecies, female humans. I'd like to think that we've evolved past the same talking points of abortions, because that's just, it's like, to put it in terms that everyone can relate to, it's like me going to buy a car and the car salesman only wanting to show me the lighted mirror and the cup holder. I care about what's under the hood also. I also care about the tires. I care about the horsepower. I care about the warranty. I don't just care about these cosmetic things. And I say that they're cosmetic because the arguments that they make in support of these talking points are completely false. They're ridiculous, easily disproven, shallow, vapid talking points. That's all it is. But it works. And they're able to go out there and convince women that, oh my gosh, you're going to die in the back alley with hangers unless you come out and vote. That's literally, it's not the case ever. And it's so goofy, but that's the talking point that they use. They have nothing else. So they have to use this abusive Ike Turner-esque fear-mongering on women. Like, oh my gosh, you're going to be beaten in the street. Your husband's going to be mad at you if you don't vote for Trump. They use this instead of telling us, this is what we're doing about the economy. This is what we're doing to protect your children in schools so that your daughters can go to the bathroom and not get raped by a teenage male who's 18 years old who chooses that day to identify as female. If they spoke to that, maybe they'd have a little bit more success. But I get really tired of women falling for this. If you don't want to be known as the weaker sex, then step up and don't vote like the weaker sex.
Yeah, it's been an amazing effort from the left to not only turn abortion into healthcare, right? We've seen that. But now abortion is protecting the life of my daughter. And I just saw CNN interviewed some guy leaving a polling booth saying he's voting to protect the life of my daughter with the choices of her body. And you're like, what in the world, man? First of all, Trump said I'm not going to ban abortion, but then you're saying I'm going to, sorry, go ahead.
How perverted is that? That audio, that video that you're talking about, that dad who came out, I'm like, your first thought is to sexualize an issue pertaining to your daughters. Like, you come out and you're just asked a general question about who did you vote for and what motivated you. And his first thought was sex and aborting his grandchildren. that kind of blew my mind. I thought that was absolutely perverse. And he was like all emotional coming up. And I don't know, if I was his wife, I would have probably started divorce proceedings. I mean, he's all emotional and he comes up and then the first thing he talks about is his children, who I assume are minors, sex and abortion. That's his thought. Like nothing else about their economic future, nothing else about them potentially getting into World War III, nothing about them being kicked off their sports teams due to cosplaying males who have a mental illness, nothing of that. He went right to abortion and right to, I just find that absolutely perverse that is like the first response that this dude had walking out of it. But to the point, Mike, that I was talking about, that's all that Harris and everyone else, what are they going to do? Talk about Walz going to China or the fact that Harris can't seem to find the parts of the border that doesn't have the wall? I mean, it's just been such an abysmal past 4 years. They have nothing else. It's all they have. And I'm sickened that it actually with some people works.
Yeah, too many. Whether it's enough, that we'll find out very soon. But certainly, like every clip I've seen of people walking out on CNN, young women, is abortion. It's the very first thing they all ever say is abortion. So it's pretty wild. You alluded to this. I got to come up with a better word for it, but it's something like the battered woman vote or something. It's maybe too graphic a term, but it's like this vision. And it started with Michelle Obama at her Kalamazoo speech, and then they had the ads about it. And I saw all these Twitter made up stories of knocking on a door, a husband comes to the front of the door, says we're voting for Trump, and the woman's in the background mouthing to the door knockers, no, I'm actually going to do the right thing. I'm voting for Kamala, but don't say anything. What a weird narrative they're trying to make with that. What do you make of that?
I think it's abusive, and I don't believe any of their anecdotes. I don't think a single one of these things have happened. I really don't. And it just kind of, I mean, it's part of the abusive pattern. I mean, the idea of setting up this story about an abusive husband that won't let his wife vote, when literally the candidate that is in question, her husband, was slapping a chick in line at the valet at the Cannes Film Festival, and the media, the guy who impregnated his nanny, the guy whose female colleagues were accusing of workplace harassment, sexual harassment, all of that was covered up by the media. The sheer irony of them deploying that argument when her husband has that baggage is absolute chef's kiss, complete tone deafness from this party. But they wouldn't be able to get away with it were it not for the media. It's believe all women unless it's inconvenient. And I also find it entirely ironic that it's done on behalf of a candidate who got to where she is because she was manipulated by a party into this position and appointed to every single thing that she had, except when she finally ran for election as senator. But then she was even groomed and appointed to be in line for that position as well. She never got anything through sheer motivational pursuit for her own best interest. It was always she was being levied by the powers that be in the Democrat Party. Everything about that to me just absolutely strikes of hypocrisy. And I think if some of these other people out there were a little bit more self-aware and a little bit, I don't know, maybe if they had their eyes open, then they would see how insane this is. But the audacity of using women like this, this is one of the reasons why I don't know how the Democrat Party is still relevant to females of today, because they speak to them like we lived 100 years ago. Their messages are not relevant. They're not timely. They don't actually solve any of the problems that we're dealing with. And quite frankly, the most abusive stuff that I've seen has been coming from this party. I'm tired of getting battered by their economic policies. I'm tired of getting battered, by watching our teenage girls suffer through all of the trans ideology and forcing them into and disenfranchising them when it comes to their sports teams, et cetera. So it's in poor taste. It's horrific. It diminishes the real problem of battered women and domestic violence victims. I find it really just at least a horrible taste in my mouth. It's just disgusting.
Dana Loesch. Dana, we got about 30 seconds. There's still, voting's open right now, right? What's your message to anyone who's maybe watching this now that can still go out and vote and hasn't? I feel like almost something like sit back and see what happened mode. But no, it's still happening.
If you don't go vote, I'm going to come to your house and kick your ass. That's what's going to happen. If you don't go vote, I'm going to come to your house and kick your ass. That's what's going to happen. I promise. Dana
Loesch, The Dana Show. Great to talk to you, Dana.
Good to see you, Mike.
Talk to you soon. Coming up next, Dr. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation. We're going to be here on The First, live coverage. I'm working till 2 a.m. So we'll be here all night long. Keep it right here. The First TV. Spread the word. and go vote.